The Galactic Endurance Trials had existed for approximately 3,000 standard cycles, which was long enough for most civilized species to forget why they'd started in the first place. Something about proving diplomatic worthiness, demonstrating species resilience, fostering mutual respect through shared suffering, the usual bureaucratic nonsense that sounded profound in council chambers, but meant absolutely nothing when you were actually starving on a hostile rock somewhere in the outer spirals. The premise was beautifully simple, which made it perfect for governmental operations. Drop representatives from various species onto a mutually hostile environment, provide 0 rations, and see who could survive the longest, using only their wits and whatever the planet had to offer. No weapons beyond basic survival tools, no communication devices, no emergency extraction unless you were literally dying. The planets selected rotated annually, always chosen for their challenging characteristics. A diplomatic term meaning this place will absolutely try to murder you in creative ways. This cycle's chosen location was planet designation GX 7749, though the selection committee had taken to calling it the Verdant Deathtrap after preliminary surveys. Lush, vibrant, practically bursting with botanical growth, and according to every xenobiological scanner in the known galaxy, approximately 97% of said growth was spectacularly lethal to carbon-based life. The remaining 3% would just make you wish you were dead. The planet was a veritable buffet of toxins, alkaloids, venomous compounds, and chemical compositions that made cyanide look like a nutritional supplement, perfect for separating the truly resilient species from the pretenders. Each participating species brought their best warriors, survivalists, individuals trained specifically for this moment. The Karvok Supremacy sent Commander Threxnel, a 7-foot reptilian specimen whose scales had supposedly withstood plasma fire and whose people prided themselves on enduring weeks without sustenance. The Pleian Collective dispatched Unit 47 Zeta, an insectoid whose hive-mind connection gave it access to millions of cycles of accumulated survival knowledge. The Velm Consortium offered up philosopher-survivor Kelmeth, a gelatinous being whose species had colonized gas giants and considered physical hardship beneath their intellectual capabilities, but participated anyway out of diplomatic obligation. And then there was Earth's representative, Marcus Webb. Marcus was 42 standard Earth years, balding slightly at the crown, with the kind of soft middle that suggested someone who spent more time behind a desk than in survival situations. He wore wire-rimmed glasses, actual corrective lenses, like some primitive, and had arrived at the orbital staging station, carrying a worn backpack and a slightly dog-eared field guide to xenobotany. His official title was something obscure involving botanical research at a university nobody had heard of. The betting pools gave him approximately 4 hours. "I'm just saying," Administrator Vixler muttered from the observation deck, watching the monitors display each participant's biometric data. Earth had 3,000 cycles to prepare for this. They could have sent literally anyone else. Her assistant, a floating polyp named Brentix, bobbed in agreement. Military records indicate they have soldiers who've survived in extreme conditions. Deserts, Arctic zones, that bizarre place they call Australia. Instead they send a botanist. A university botanist, Vixler corrected. Not even a field researcher. I reviewed his file. His last 5 cycles have been spent studying lichen cultivation in controlled laboratory environments. Down on GX 7749's surface, the 4 participants had been deposited in separate quadrants of the same general region, close enough to make the trial interesting, far enough to prevent immediate confrontation. Each had been provided identical basic tools, a small cutting implement, a water purification tablet dispenser, and a scanner that would identify potentially toxic substances. Commander Threxnell surveyed his surroundings with predatory satisfaction. The Karvok had developed elaborate fasting rituals specifically for trials like this. He would not eat for the first 5 standard days, allowing his body to enter a hibernation-adjacent state that conserved energy while maintaining combat readiness. When the weaker species inevitably collapsed or withdrew, his victory would demonstrate the superiority of Karvok discipline. He settled into a meditation pose beneath a twisted tree analog, dripping with suspicious purple fruit, and began his warrior's trance. Unit 47 Zeta immediately began efficiency calculations. The Pliana approach was methodical: catalog all available resources, cross-reference with the collective's biological database, identify the least toxic options, and maintain minimum caloric intake to preserve function. It skittered between the undergrowth, compound eyes analyzing everything, scanner chirping warnings at nearly every plant it examined, red alerts. Everything was poisonous. Everything. This would require careful planning and precise resource management. Philosopher-survivor Kelmuth oozed into the shade of a large boulder, its translucent body rippling with what might have been annoyance. The Velm didn't truly need food in the traditional sense for several days. They could absorb ambient nutrients from atmosphere and water. This trial was beneath their dignity, but withdrawal meant losing face in the consortium. It would wait, endure, and prove that intellect trumped base survival instincts. Marcus Webb looked around at the explosion of green and purple and blue vegetation surrounding him, adjusted his glasses, and said to nobody in particular, "Oh, neat." Then he walked directly to the nearest bush, plucked off a handful of bright red berries, and popped them into his mouth. Every alarm on the orbital observation station went off simultaneously. "What is he doing?" Vixla shrieked, her cranial tendrils standing rigid with horror. The scanner reading from Marcus's location flashed crimson warnings across every display. The berries registered as containing concentrated levels of compounds that would cause immediate paralysis in most species, followed by respiratory failure, organ shutdown, and a particularly unpleasant death involving involuntary muscle spasms. "Get medical teams on standby." Brentix was already frantically keying commands. "Prepare emergency extraction." On the surface, Marcus chewed thoughtfully. "Bit tannic," he muttered, picking a seed from his teeth. "Reminds me of choke cherries. Not bad, though." He plucked several more handfuls and stuffed them into his pockets for later. The medical teams waited tensely. Marcus wandered over to a vine-covered tree, examined the leaves, and started pulling off the fuzzy, kidney-shaped foliage. He rolled them between his palms, sniffed them, and then just ate them. Raw. The scanners promptly identified contact toxins that caused cellular necrosis. "He's not even using the purification tablets," someone yelled from the monitoring station. "He's not using the scanner," someone else added, voice climbing toward hysteria. Marcus hummed to himself, something that sounded like an ancient earth tune, and continued his casual foraging. He found tuberous roots that registered as containing paralytic neurotoxins. He dug them up with his hands and bit into one like an apple, dirt still clinging to the flesh. He discovered a patch of fungi growing on rotting logs, identified by the scanner as containing enough toxic alkaloids to kill a Karvok in under 30 seconds. Marcus carefully harvested them, sorted them by type, and wrapped them in large leaves for transport. "Perhaps," Vixla said weakly, watching the human's biometric data remain frustratingly stable, "perhaps the scanners are malfunctioning." They recalibrated. The scanners were fine. Everything Marcus Webb was consuming was genuinely, verifiably, scientifically lethal. He just didn't seem to care. By day 2, The disparity in approaches became stark. Commander Threxnell remained in disciplined meditation, having consumed nothing except a carefully rationed amount of purified water. His biometrics showed excellent vital signs. Karvok physiology was indeed impressive in starvation conditions. Unit 47 Zeta had managed to locate a species of root vegetable that the scanner rated as only moderately toxic and consumed precisely calculated portions. It was not pleasant. The platoon's efficiency had decreased by 7%, but this was within acceptable parameters. Philosopher-survivor Kelmuth floated serenely in a shallow pool, absorbing trace minerals and feeling smugly superior about the whole affair. Marcus had apparently decided to set up a proper camp. He'd constructed a small shelter from branches, started a fire using friction methods that seemed positively archaic, and was currently roasting what appeared to be tubers over the flames. The same tubers that had registered as containing enough toxins to induce hemorrhaging. The heat might denature the compounds, Brentix suggested hopefully. Vixila just shook her head. They'd analyzed the readings. Cooking these particular tubers made them more toxic, concentrating the alkaloids. Marcus ate 3 of them, looking genuinely pleased with himself. "This is surprisingly similar to cassava prep," he said to the empty forest, still unaware his every word was being monitored. "You'd never eat these raw back home either." "Well, you could, but only once." He laughed at his own joke. Nobody on the observation deck found it funny. By day 3, things began deteriorating for the non-human participants. Commander Threxnell's meditation remained strong, but the Karvok's body was starting to show signs of stress. Muscle efficiency down 14%, cognitive function slightly impaired. Still within acceptable ranges, but the decline was beginning. Unit 47, Zeta's situation was worse. The moderately toxic roots had accumulated in its system. The platoon's complex biology meant toxins affected multiple redundant organs simultaneously. It was functional, but efficiency had dropped to 71% and falling. The calculations were becoming concerning. Kelmuth had discovered that the ambient nutrients in GX7749's environment were significantly lower than anticipated. The water sources contained compounds that interfered with velm absorption. For the first time, the philosopher-survivor felt something that might have been hunger. Marcus had found mushrooms. So many mushrooms. He'd gathered approximately 15 different varieties, carefully sorted them, and was having what appeared to be the time of his life. "Look at this one," he exclaimed, holding up a specimen that resembled a brain made of purple velvet. The scanner identified it as containing neurotoxic compounds similar to muscarine. "This is almost identical to Amanita muscaria, fly agaric. Humans have been eating these for thousands of years." He paused. "Well, eating them for the psychoactive effects mostly. But still." He carefully prepared it, boiling it twice and discarding the water, which the monitors showed was now basically toxic sludge, and ate the remaining flesh. "Slightly chewy," was his professional assessment. "I want to file a formal complaint," Vixla announced to nobody in particular. "This cannot be within regulations." But it was. Marcus wasn't cheating, wasn't using hidden supplies, wasn't doing anything except eating the local flora. The fact that the local flora should absolutely be killing him was apparently irrelevant. Day 4 brought the first major casualty. Commander Threxnell's discipline finally cracked. 5 days without food and his body was consuming itself. The hunger became impossible to ignore. He looked at the purple fruit hanging from the tree above his meditation spot, fruit he'd been consciously avoiding because the scanner rated it as extremely hazardous. Desperation made survivors into gamblers. He ate one fruit. His superior Karvok constitution, allowed him to process toxins better than most species. Perhaps these would be manageable. Perhaps his people's famous resilience would see him through. It did not. Within 20 minutes, Commander Threxnell was convulsing, his scales flushing colors never meant to exist in nature. Emergency extraction hauled him to the medical bay, where he spent the next several hours intimately acquainted with every toxin purging protocol in the Galactic Medical Database. He would survive, but his trial was over. Unit 47 Zeta made its critical error on day 5. The accumulated toxins had reduced efficiency to 53%. Cognitive function was impaired. When it discovered a cluster of blue flowers with edible-looking petals, the careful Plean calculations that should have warned against consumption were just slightly off. The flowers contained glycosides that interfered with the insectoid's respiratory spiracles. Emergency extraction. Medical bay. Another participant down. Philosopher-survivor Kelmuth lasted until day 6 through sheer stubborn intellectual pride, but eventually even the Velm's advanced consciousness couldn't overcome basic biology. It attempted to filter nutrients from a water source, failed to properly analyze the mineral content, and absorbed compounds that crystallized within its gelatinous matrix. The medical team was getting excellent practice with xenotoxicology. Marcus, meanwhile, had progressed to cooking elaborate meals. He'd found something resembling wild onions, which contained sulfur compounds that would cause severe gastric distress in most species, and was sautéing them with those mushrooms and some greens that the scanner identified as containing cardiac glycosides similar to digitalis. This would pair wonderfully with some protein, he mused, but I'm trying to be respectful of local ecosystems. No hunting unless absolutely necessary. He took a bite of his toxic stir-fry. Besides, plenty of calories in these tubers. And the nuts, did I mention I found nuts? Those were fun. Had to roast them forever to break down the cyanogenic compounds, but totally worth it. The observation deck had gone silent. Not the tense silence of before, but the hollow silence of beings whose understanding of biological reality had been fundamentally challenged. How? Vixila whispered. Just that. How? It was Brentix who finally pulled up Earth's biological database. Not the summary that Diplomatic Corps used, the actual detailed xenobiology file. The one that listed Earth's classification. Death World. Category 12. Oh, Brentix said. Very quietly. Oh no. They began reading. The list of compounds that humans regularly consumed was extensive. Capsaicin, a chemical compound literally evolved by plants as a defense mechanism, a literal irritant that activated pain receptors. Humans sprinkled it on food for flavor. Athanol, a toxic byproduct of fermentation that caused cellular damage. Humans drank it recreationally and called it celebrating. Caffeine, a natural pesticide that insects evolved to kill other insects. Humans consumed it daily, often in massive doses, to wake up. The database listed foods that would horrify any sensible species. Nightshades, a family of plants so toxic they were named after death itself, and humans had domesticated several varieties as dietary staples. Tomatoes, potatoes, peppers, all containing compounds that ranged from mildly poisonous to definitely don't eat that. They have a plant called poison ivy. Someone read aloud, voice numb with shock. It causes severe dermatological reactions. Some humans develop immunity through repeated exposure and consider this normal. There's a fish, another researcher added, scrolling frantically, that contains tetrodotoxin, enough to kill 30 humans. They consider it a delicacy. They have specially licensed chefs who prepare it. Sometimes the chefs mess up and people die. They keep eating it anyway. The truly horrifying realization settled over the observation deck. Humans hadn't evolved on a planet with food. They'd evolved on a planet where they had to argue with their dinner about who was going to poison whom first. Their entire digestive system was essentially an advanced chemical warfare defense mechanism. When Marcus was finally contacted on day 7, the only participant still conscious and active, he seemed genuinely confused by the fuss. The trial's over. He looked around at the lush forest surrounding his camp. Already, I was actually having a really nice time. This planet's botanical diversity is remarkable. I've catalogued 47 species that have near analogues on Earth, and the convergent evolution of defensive compounds is fascinating from an Mr. Webb. Vixela interrupted. Her voice strained. You've been consuming lethal quantities of toxic compounds for 7 consecutive days. Oh. Marcus adjusted his glasses. Well, yes, I suppose so, but nothing too serious. I mean, the tannin levels in those berries were high but manageable. The glycosides required proper preparation, obviously. And you have to be careful with those mushrooms. Some of them have compounds similar to alpha-amanitin, which would absolutely destroy your liver, but I avoided those varieties. You avoided, Vixela repeated slowly. The deadly ones. I mean, I'm not trying to die here. That would be silly. He picked up one of his carefully sorted mushroom piles. These are perfectly safe if prepared correctly. Humans have been eating them for millennia. There's evidence we were foraging fungi before we even developed agriculture. Your species, Brentick said, drifting closer to the communication console, developed agriculture after establishing which plants could kill you. Well, yeah, trial and error mostly. Lots of error. Historically speaking, we definitely ate a lot of people's worth of poisonous plants before figuring out which ones were okay. Marcus said this cheerfully, as if describing a mildly interesting historical footnote rather than a horror story of evolutionary pressure. But that's how you learn, right? The silence stretched. Mr. Webb, Vixela finally managed. What do you normally eat? On Earth? Oh, you know. Normal stuff. Eggs for breakfast. That's embryonic fluid from birds. Great protein. Sometimes bacon. That's salt-cured meat from pigs. Lunch might be a sandwich, maybe some aged cheese. That's milk that we let bacteria colonate until it solidifies and develops strong flavors. Dinner could be anything. Steak, maybe, with a nice red wine, fermented grape juice with 12 to 15% alcohol content. He paused, thinking, sometimes I get Thai food. That's got chili peppers, which contain capsaicin. Makes your mouth burn. Really delicious. Every word was making it worse. The burning, someone whispered from the back of the observation deck, is delicious. Oh yeah. Endorphin rush. Your body thinks you're in pain, so it releases natural opioids to compensate. Feels great. Your species, Vixela said, speaking very slowly and carefully, tricks itself into releasing pain management chemicals for entertainment. I mean, when you put it that way, it sounds weird. The Galactic Endurance Trials Committee convened an emergency session within hours of Marcus's extraction. The human was fine, better than fine, actually. He'd apparently gained 0.5 kilogram during the trial. The 3 other participants were recovering, but would require extensive rehabilitation. We need to implement new restrictions, Council member Thexkal insisted, his carapace clicking with agitation. The spirit of the trials is to test survival capabilities across species, not to create competitions where certain participants have unfair biological advantages. Are you suggesting, Earth's diplomatic representative asked sweetly, that we exclude Deathworld species from participation? The council chamber went very quiet. That was specifically, explicitly, exactly the kind of discrimination that 17 different galactic treaties prohibited. Perhaps, another council member suggested desperately, we could require participants to only consume foods their species has historically established as safe. Marcus Webb consumed nothing that wasn't historically safe for human consumption. Earth's representative pointed out, every compound he ingested has been part of human diets for thousands of years. We can provide extensive documentation. But they're toxic. To you, not to us. Dietary requirements vary by species. Surely the Council isn't suggesting that humans should be penalized for having different biological tolerances. The legal trap was perfect. Any restriction specific enough to exclude humans would be discriminatory. Any restriction broad enough to be fair would be meaningless. In the end, they declared Marcus Webb the winner by default, the only participant who'd completed the full trial period without medical intervention. His prize was a ceremonial crystal representing galactic perseverance and a formal recognition of Earth's survival capabilities. Marcus accepted graciously, gave a short speech thanking the committee for the opportunity to study xenobotanical adaptations in person, and asked if he could keep his field notes from the planet for research purposes. Back on Earth, when asked by news agencies how he'd prepared for the prestigious Galactic Endurance Trials, Marcus gave an interview that made its way across human networks. Honestly, I just ate what looked familiar. Most planets with carbon-based biochemistry develop similar defensive compounds in their flora. Once you've studied terrestrial botany, you recognize the patterns. Plus, I grew up in rural Oregon. My grandmother taught me mushroom foraging when I was 8. You learn pretty quick which fungi will kill you and which ones just taste terrible. The interviewer, a young journalist who'd never been off-planet, looked slightly ill. And the ones that taste terrible, you still eat them. Well, yeah, you just cook them better. Add salt. Salt makes everything good. Marcus smiled. Actually, you know what I really missed out there? Hot sauce. I kept thinking these dishes would be perfect with some proper hot sauce. Next time I do something like this, I'm bringing condiments. The phrase "next time" caused several galactic officials to experience what humans would call stress-induced headaches. The Galactic Endurance Trials Committee spent the next 3 cycles completely overhauling their regulations. They added extensive clauses about biological baselines, dietary restrictions, and species-specific advantages. They implemented new categories and divisions. They created elaborate ranking systems. None of it changed the fundamental reality they'd discovered. When you invited Death World species to a survival competition, you had to accept that their definition of survival might include casually consuming what everyone else considered instant death. The truly ironic part, the detail that kept Vixel awake during her rest cycles, staring at the ceiling of her quarters and questioning her understanding of biology, was that Earth hadn't sent their best. They hadn't sent a military survivalist, or an elite wilderness expert, or even someone who'd specifically trained for the trials. They'd sent a university botanist who'd thought this would be a nice break from his teaching schedule. A pleasant week outdoors, a chance to see some interesting plants. He'd treated the Galactic Endurance Trials, the prestigious, ancient, revered test of species resilience, like a relaxing camping trip. And he'd won by eating his way through what everyone else considered an unambiguous death sentence, humming cheerfully the entire time. Somewhere in the galactic databases, a note was added to Earth's file, flagged in bright warnings for any future committees. Death World inhabitants do not recognize standard definitions of hostile environment. Adjust expectations accordingly. Recommend assuming humans can and will consume anything that doesn't immediately kill them. Sometimes things that should immediately kill them. Exercise extreme caution when designing any trial involving consumption of local resources. Marcus Webb returned to his university, published 3 papers on xenobotanical convergent evolution, and occasionally showed his students the ceremonial crystal he'd won, the Galactic Endurance Trials, he'd say, turning it to catch the light. Lovely experience. Planet had remarkable fungal diversity, very similar to Pacific Northwest ecology actually. Made me a bit homesick. His students would nod, not quite understanding why their professor's vacation story seemed to make visiting diplomats look vaguely traumatized. But then they were human. The idea of carefully identifying which local plants would kill you before eating the rest seemed perfectly reasonable. That was just what you did when you went camping.